All right, everyone. Starting just a little bit late. This is the Budget and Finance Committee on September 19th. We'll start with introductions with you, Ms. Browse.
Mona Browse, Chief of Staff to Mayor Reports.
Lance Wilbur, Office of Management and Budget. Alex Slipchat, Chief Fiscal Officer.
Fred Dyson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant.
Big Zalatow.
Pete Peterson.
And is there anyone in the back there? Oh,
Felix Rivera.
okay, great. I think Ms. LaFrance is here or will be joining us shortly. Is there anybody on the phone? Okay. All right, so pretty full agenda today. We're going to begin with a discussion of the CAFR from Mr. Slifka. Please.
So this will be brief, and in preparation for this meeting, we sent you a bunch of material about Lance's general update on expenditures. We sent you Treasury's general update on where we are for revenue. We sent you some information on earthquake expense. And you all received, about a month ago, a copy of the CAFR, both, I think, electronically as well as physically, at the audit committee yesterday, ably chaired by Mr. Dyson. Our auditor, BDO, went through the audit. In a nutshell, it was a clean opinion. We had only one minor boo-boo. Everything else we did well, and I would say it was a testament to, we spent $80 million on a software system. It actually does work after a fashion. And just to remind you how we got to this place, we delivered the 2017 CAFR to you in January of this year, and so we really only started working on 2018 in February. We got all done with it in a matter of 8 weeks. We went through the entire year of 2018, delivered it to the auditor. They went through all their work and got the stuff to us August 23rd. We actually very specifically made a June 30th deadline, which we were obligated to get the ML&P books audited for our agreement we have with Chugach. I'll stop there and see if you have any questions at all on the CAFR.
Questions on the CAFR? Okay. Again, I'm running a little bit short-staffed right now. I think that Mr. Weddleton might end up having some questions, but are you done with the CAFR? Do you want to go on to the next topic, or is there anything else?
I'm happy to answer any questions. It's pretty self-explanatory. The municipality is in pretty good shape financially.
Okay. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just say when we reviewed this yesterday that we are in agreement with the administration's view on it. It was very well done, and BDO is actually confident that they can get the next year's CAFR done even earlier. So it sounds like things are coming back on track.
Good. That's good to have that be the new normal. For the record, we've been joined by Ms. LaFrance. Yes, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, so I normally add that BDO said they got really good cooperation with the administration, and once again commented on how confident our internal audit folks are. They were helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. For the record, we've been joined by Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and our most recent bond ratings were excellent. We still maintain the top ratings, and so that's obviously going to be good going forward. Shouldn't have trouble selling those bonds, and if the voters approve them. So,
and as to that effect, yes. So with Standard & Poor's, we maintain AAA rating, which is the highest rating with Fitch. We are AA plus. And they have said that they will never take us to AAA because we are in Alaska, and Alaska is a cyclical energy economy, and that's just the way it is. But yes, we retain those ratings. I think we've shared with you 2 weeks ago, we sold $100 million worth of bonds, some new bonds, and also we did a refunding of some existing bonds. The refunding, we're able to save $5 million over the next 10 years over what we would have otherwise paid. We, I think, issued everything at an all-in cost of somewhere around 2.2%. To give you a perspective, when we sold bonds a year ago, it was 3.2%. So it was a very good rate, and it reflects the fact that it's AAA rated. And so all the work that went into this saves the municipality money in terms of debt service over time.
Thank you. Note for the record that Ms. Quinn Davidson is the co-chair of this committee, but she was taken out of state today. She's not able to be here today, but sends her regards. Let's move on to point B then, 3B. I believe this is from you, Ms. Brous.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realized while I was trying to compile the information for you that we haven't had a meeting since the final budget numbers came out. So on August 19th, when the state released its final budget numbers, I believe I distributed these same handouts via email, but I've given them to you again so we can talk through them a little bit. The initial signal from the first enacted FY20 budget was pretty devastating for Anchorage, and luckily the reversal of some of those cuts has resulted in a much lesser problem. The direct financial impact so far is mostly limited to the school bond debt reimbursement, which is approximately $21 million. Traditionally, the state has reimbursed school district bonds at a 50-50 share with the city. They stopped providing any reimbursement on those bonds, I believe, in 2015. So since 2015, Anchorage has been fully supporting the school district and its capital projects. And the legislative and administration move on the school bond debt reimbursement for this year means that they are now down to 25% reimbursement of the previously issued bonds that had been committed at 50%. So that's about $21 million. We are in conversations with the school district right now to keep up a conversation about what they intend to do with that. We have talked about the potential that there is some flexibility in some of their reserve accounts, so they might be able to cover some of that debt on their own, but they have signaled to us that they will be coming to us and ask for an increase in the tax cap to accommodate that bond debt reimbursement. So that will be part of the conversation as we move through the budget. Okay. The second impact is the Community Assistance Program, also known as revenue sharing or municipal assistance. Historically, we have seen upwards of $65 million come in through municipal assistance and or community assistance and revenue sharing. We have been on the decline significantly over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, we were getting about $25 million. This year, we are receiving $4.6 million, which is actually 1.6 underneath our projected amount. We received 6.1 in 2018, and we're under the impression that the distribution was supposed to be the same as 2018 because the same amount of money was put into the fund and distributed through the community program. So we are endeavoring to figure out why it's $1.6 million less with DCCE. So in order to accommodate that problem, I think Lance and Alex have shown you in some of the revenue reports, or Dan actually, the treasury reports that show the revenue coming in under over. So that's represented in the reports from Treasury. But in order to accommodate it, it means that we have to hope that other revenues are coming in higher or our budget to actuals comes in a little tighter. But we are accommodating the lower number in the 2020 budget proposal just to be safe until we know what the story really is there. There is the potential, though, as part of this literature that you have in front of you, on the first two documents are the restoration of initial cuts. The second two documents are the vetoes that stood. And on the last page of the narrative document, you'll see the deletion of the fund capitalization for community assistance. So the way they rewrote the program in 2016 set aside money that would spin off the $30 million that would go into the community assistance distribution pot. If they do not recapitalize, reinvest into that fund on an annual basis, then the amount of money left to distribute to the communities is lower. They have not recapitalized that fund as of today. We don't know if they will. I think that we have a general inclination that a lot of the representatives and senators might want to do that next year, and we will be asking them to do that. So the current allocation for next year is unknown at this time. Those two are the largest direct impacts. Some of the other restorations that were originally reviewed, I think by Lance, the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting, are things like the Pittman-Robertson funds. They were originally cut, but they were put back in. The early childhood grants. These are not direct impacts to the municipal budget. They are direct impacts to the community. So putting back Head Start and early learning programs, putting back Alaska Legal Services funding, restoring the Human Services Community Matching Grants, which I think a lot of you have heard about over the last couple of weeks. But the direct impact is the school bond debt and the revenue sharing piece of it.
Any questions for Ms. Brass? Mr. Dyson?
Can you kind of briefly summarize the funding we've lost on public safety? That's cops, courts, corrections, parole, and also then our services to quote the homeless community.
The funding that we have lost to cops, courts, prosecution, et cetera.
And corrections.
In corrections, the municipality hasn't lost any money in that arena.
Okay.
The state budget has decreased in that arena.
Right.
I will say that while we haven't had a cut in that realm, our DOC contract to actually put people in jail has increased by $1 million over the last 3 years because they were delaying an inflationary increase until a few years ago, and they laid it on the table and said, you have to pay this now. So that's an additional $1 million that we weren't paying a few years ago. The homelessness funding, the combination of the AHFC funding, what you regularly hear referred to as BHAP money, Homeless Assistance Program money, and SNUG funding, which is SNUG stand for? Special Needs Housing Grant. Those two programs, as well as the Human Services Community Matching Grant Program, which is funded at about $800,000 from the state and $400,000, oh no, a little more than that, from the municipality, has been cut by about 20%. And the initial cut was 100%. And the way that the providers prepared under the full cut allowed them to make some adjustments and reallocate. So where we're really losing in that 20% cut in Anchorage is in case management and outreach workers. And most of the places have decreased staff by 1 or 2, but the service provision isn't necessarily changing.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. Treatment. What's the situation on that?
Originally, in the capital budget this year was a $10 million appropriation to fund treatment centers throughout the state, and that was vetoed.
Okay. And any impact for DOT that's liable to affect us? Repair of roads and snow clearing
aside from
on the state roads here.
Aside from continued ratcheting down of the way they invest in their lighting programs and some of the safety standards, but as far as snow plowing goes, I can't speak to exactly how they will allocate their budget over time. Bill Falsey.
There is one thing that we should service. The Department of Transportation closed the Silvertip DOT maintenance station, which is way over by Hope. And our understanding is that they're hoping to service all the things that Silvertip used to service with some combination of Seward and Anchorage. We don't have perfect visibility on how that's supposed to work, but it is entirely possible that the hillside will get less rapid snow plowing service because the crews that leave out of Anchorage will now much farther down the Seward Highway. So we don't know it yet, but they're getting ratcheted down and they lost that.
So the hillside goes from 72 hours to...
So I wasn't asking about the capital. On the operating side, on the road maintenance of the state roads, any impact there?
Not that we can see, no.
All right, thank you. Good answers. Thanks, Chair.
So, trying to look through the spreadsheet you gave us here, it's a little bit difficult to
It's-
find things.
yes.
So, and the things that say
I didn't
veto,
make
the
this
things that are
one.
vetoed, the things that keep, or the things that were restored?
Correct.
Okay.
So the first two pages, one the line item says keep summary is the restoration, and the others are the vetoes that stood.
So I wasn't able to find it, but I was under the impression that the $10 million stream had been restored. But you're saying it stayed vetoed?
Yes, it is not in the capital budget.
But there's $6 million of actual operating treatment grants that were cut, that were restored, but that's part of a long, ongoing.
Right. That's
declining-
not the additional $10 million they tried to put in this year.
Correct.
That didn't make it in.
Right.
Great.
And the providers are facing substantive cuts this year.
And the other question sort of related to that is, I know we're saying like this is the budget, but there is certainly rumors, and I think more than rumors, there's expectation among legislature that they're going back to Juneau in probably late October or sometime in November, and to deal with the PFD. And you work down there a lot. Is there any way that through that process this could get altered, or do you think that the call is narrow enough that this couldn't get altered?
The call can be altered as well, so it is possible. I don't believe it's likely,
Okay.
but who knows?
Well, I mean, if the governor says we're going to increase the PFD from 1,600 to 3,000, where would that money come from? Where do they think that money will come from, if not budget cuts?
Permanent fund? I can't speak to where they think that money is going to come from.
Okay. Well, good. I mean, but my point, but I hope my point is clear. Just that we think this is the final budget.
Correct.
But there is yet another round coming, and there is a small chance, but a chance that some of these things might get altered yet again.
And while you're speaking about that, I will mention that one of the other unknowns at this time is in the 19 approved budget, we had, I believe, 2,500 as the PFD expectations, which under normal circumstances, I don't think would really affect anybody, except that we receive garnishments from that allocation. So the higher the dividends, the more garnishments we can receive.
Sure.
Right now, the dividend is set at 1,600, so those garnishments will theoretically be lower, but until they actually come through, because of the way the appropriations are staggered, we won't know what that decrease might be until we actually have them.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions for Onum before we move on to? Actually, I don't think Mr. Clauda is going to speak today.
I can
Yeah.
give you a quick update on the commission if you want.
Yeah, actually, and then I have a very specific question on the fire department. Is that going to be? Who is going to speak to that?
Bill
Mr.
Folsey.
Falsey. Okay, during the pay correction section. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Budget Advisory Committee meets on the first Thursday of every month, and at their last meeting, they were reviewing, sent a resolution to the Assembly in consideration of the spending limit and the tax cap, and that should be in your packet for consideration on Tuesday night. They are ready to start getting engaged in the budget process when we submit the budget to the Assembly here after October 2nd, so we'll be meeting with them, having spent most of our October talking about that. They are also anticipating when the time is right to start weighing in on the stormwater utility when the rates issues start coming up. So when that contract gets on board and that process starts moving along, they're ready to sink their teeth into that. So I think that's all I have for the Budget Advisory.
Any questions for Nolan? For Lance? Ms. Brouse had a comment.
Oh, go with Mr. Dyson.
Mr. Dyson.
No, I really appreciate the paper we got on the spending cap and the tax cap. That was very well done and very informative. And if the administration is going to try to take the leadership in integrating all of that and eliminating kind of the contradictions and confusion around it, I commend you for that. Typical of our process of legislative bodies and administration, keep making new laws, and very seldom they go back and make sure it doesn't impact and contradict other things on the books. So it's not unusual, but if you guys appreciate you picking it up, and if you're going to work on that, hands off, I'll stand and clap.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think we have to plan to figure out some way to get the message out that by eliminating the spending cap, we're not setting the assembly up so that we can, you know, throw money down a rat hole like most of the taxpayers think we already do. And so it's a public relations effort that is probably necessary. Thank you.
Mr. Constant.
And I would suggest that starts here with us not saying we're eliminating the spending cap, but instead making it comport with the code or making it comport with common practice. Because we're not eliminating it, we're just making it rational.
Consistent with.
Yeah, integrate.
Yeah,
Integrate.
and so I would say let us not say we're eliminating the spending cap, and we'll probably not have as much problems.
Okay. So that let's move on unless there's anything more. We'll go to Mr. Falsey. Do you have a PowerPoint this time?
Do.
He does. That's why none of us brought any.
Okay. So if you want to get that set up.
I don't know that it's very long though.
Bill, if I can interrupt for just a moment, I would say while he's setting that up, just to give something to the body to chew on for a little bit. You'll get a much more formal presentation on this information I'm about to tell you, but it's something to start thinking about. We've been working through the budget process to prepare for, you know, presenting you with the budget over the next 2 weeks. And Jason and I started sort of struggling with why it is always so difficult. And so we thought, let's look at how this has worked over the last 10, 15, 20 years. How has the relationship between the state and the municipality worked? And I know that Mr. Peterson and Mr. Dyson have served there and understand this very well. But when you look back, at a minimum over the last 10 years, the state participation in funding community work, community programs, emergency services, all of these things have decreased in a very significant way. When you tally everything up, you start with municipal assistance and revenue sharing, and in 2008 it was $25 million, and now it's $5 million. So you have a $20 million decrease there. Traditionally, capital budgets average for Anchorage $50 million. $50 million in road projects and infrastructure projects, and that does not include the school district capital investments. That's just for the municipality. So there you're up to $70 million in economic development, infrastructure, jobs, support, all gone. Also, the RCA limited the ML&P dividend, which fluctuates in and out, but averages between $7 and $10 million, or would have averaged over $7 and $10 million over the last 10 years. So we'll take that at a 10. So now we're up to $80 million. The total exclusion of school bond debt reimbursement since 2015 means that taxpayers are now supporting 100% of those voter-approved bonds, as opposed to what it previously was, which, depending on the kind of math you do, can be upwards of $75 million over the last 5 years. And you put all of these things on top of each other, and you very easily and quickly get to over $100 million. In 10 years, $100 million has disappeared from this community. And we are now feeling that crunch in a way that we have not felt before. There's no work to be done by tradespeople, so they have moved out of the state. Economic development, jobs, property taxpayers, all out to the lower 48 or other places. It sets up the conversation that I know that this body has had and has with everyone that they come into contact with, but at some point, to increase our autonomy from the fluctuations of the state, we have to have a conversation about what we're going to do with our city budget and what we want the city to be. And does that mean new revenue? Does that mean cuts? What does that look like? What can the community handle, and are they willing to support? There was an attempt at the alcohol tax, and that failed, just a little bit. And we know that some of that was, fear and marketing and people not really trusting where the money was going to go. And there are lots of ways that we can rectify some of those issues. And I know that we will be talking about it over the next few months, but I just wanted to put that out there so that number scares you.
And the $100 million is a yearly total, not a cumulative total. That's
right.
Every single year we are missing out on that.
Thank you. All right, so now we are to Mr. Falsey and pay corrections.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Over email, you had asked a question that related to whether the pay correction potential liability for SAP corrections was affecting the fire department budget. And I thought that was a good time for us to go back to the beginning and review the history. The punchline to that is partly true. Not entirely true, but partly true. And I'll step into it. So when we first started doing these presentations, the very first one of these, which was now many months ago, we said, SAP is mispaying people. What is the potential liability that is caused by that? And the answer was, well, we have a different answer for the 9 different unions we have in the municipality. So we have AMEA, APD's union, the fire union, the 2 different IBEW unions. That's why that we have 8 logos for 9 unions here, 2 contracts rather. Local operating engineers 302, public employees 71 are gardeners, plumbers, pipe fitters, and teamsters. And every one of their contracts contains a provision that deals with liquidated damages or penalties for errors in pay. And so we stepped through those and picked them all up one by one just to remind ourselves what those look like and where they came from. Since 1977, AMEA has said if you identify an error of pay and you don't fix it, it's $60 a day. Per person. And APDA, the police department unions, has said since 1975, 4 hours of pay for every 24-hour period that you have not fixed the pay error. The fire department, the previous administration on their way out the door added a $50 penalty per day for not paying firefighters correctly. Also added in the previous administration was the IBEW penalty, which was a similar $50 a day. IBEW technicians has a $25 a day. Local 302 has this fairly extraordinary 8 hours of straight time pay for every error that's not corrected day over day since 2002. Local 71, $75. Teamsters, again, 8 hours a pay. So we wrapped it all up and said it's a union story because there's nothing in our Muni code about execs and non-reps being paid incorrectly. But we have this chart of all the different contracts that report and have a penalty for errors in pay.
Including overpayments.
Including overpayments. If we give you $50 that you weren't supposed to have, you may incur 8 hours of straight time for your hardship holding that extra $50 that we gave you. So the question was, at the outset of this, if we have an SAP system that is mispaying people, and we have all of these contracts with liquidated damages or penalty clauses, what does that actually add up to? And that is a difficult question to answer, in part because there was a big debate about how to interpret some of those clauses. There was some questions about whether the penalties could compound in a certain way. It was difficult to know because without actually getting a perfect handle on how many pay errors there are, you can't even begin to estimate that. But I will tell you, as I think we have candidly disclosed in the past, the number is gigantic. I will tell you, one union actually at one point said, according to their calculations, which we disagreed with, but which they presented to us, they calculated the paper liability to be $2.4 billion. I don't think that's correct, but it's certainly on paper hundreds of millions of dollars. So what does that mean? That means we cannot proceed like this because there is just no way that we bankrupt a municipality, say congratulations, we have forked over all the cash we have, and now everybody's fired because we have no more money. And that's not what the union wants either. So the good news is, I think everybody realized that these penalty provisions were set up in a world where we anticipated onesie-twosie kind of errors, and it was supposed to slap the municipality into being responsive to cleaning up those onesie-twosie errors, not a big systemic problem like we ended up having. But that meant there was a big design problem, because now we have on a paper contract this gigantic paper liability, and we have some union members who have realized this and who are going around saying, the municipality's going to pay for your house. Just get ready, everybody's getting rich, rich, rich. And so we have to figure out a reasonable way to not bankrupt the municipality that also attends with certain members who are very eager to have a big cash out. And as I told the members at this meeting last time, our general strategy has been and remains that we solve this with non-cashable leave. So what does that actually entail? Instead of the previous chart of giving money for all these errors, wherever we have been able to negotiate a resolution, we have preferred to provide non-cashable leave. What does that mean? What does giving people extra non-cashable leave do? In the main, it means we're giving
more vacation. So previously you had a leave balance of 100 hours. Now you may have a leave balance of 150 hours, which means you can take an extra 50 hours of vacation that you didn't previously have in the bank. But it can cause a real dollar consequence, although it's a much more muted consequence. And how does that happen? So I'll go through a couple scenarios. So first example, police department. If we give the police, you're a police officer, Officer Constant, and I've just given you an extra 100 hours. There's no cap on the amount of total leave that you can have, but you were planning to go to Hawaii for 100 hours anyway. I just gave you 100 hours of non-cashable leave. It means that your cashable leave, which you've been accruing through regular contract accruals, is now not being touched because you first burned off the non-cashable leave before the cashable leave balance got accreted into. That's not a huge problem. It's a manageable problem because I never actually pay you the non-cashable leave until, in some scenarios, you ask for it, and I have discretion to say no, or you're leaving, you're retiring. So we'll pay out more cashable leave because people were able to use their non-cashable leave first, but it's spread out over the expected lifetime of all the members who are receiving non-cashable leave. That's one way it can happen. At the end, there's more to pay out.
I would be misclassified by SAP, I would be in the firefighter unit.
Okay. Good news, the firefighter is also available to you, so that'll be scenario number 2.
But also, just a clarification, Mr. Falty, you're saying non-cashable leave, but it's still paid leave. It's not unpaid leave, right?
That's correct. So you're on vacation and we're paying you your regular salary. It's not leave without pay. That's right. But there's at no point where you could come to us and say, I have a non-cashable leave balance of 80 hours. Give me money for that. Sorry, that's non-cashable. You can't cash it. Okay, so Officer Constant was fed up with Police Chief Dahl, and he quit and joined the academy, and now he's a dues-paying member of IAFF. He's joined the fire department. So he's got some different rules now, and like a lot of the unions, there is a cap on the total amount of cashable leave you can carry, because when police officers leave, you go, oh no, Chris left after 30 years, now we have to pay him a huge amount of money. Well, when the firefighters leave after 30 years, it's a predictable amount of money because we have forced them to cash out annually. You can only carry a certain number of hours into the future. Well, as it turned out, when he was previously at, say, 75% of his maximum cashable leave in the bank, and I gave him new non-cashable leave, and he went to Hawaii this year and didn't use the new cashable leave he accrued, now he got to his full cashable leave balance, or maybe even exceeded it, and that means in the end of the year, I actually do have to write him a check. So that is a new way that can cause an actual annual monetary problem, which is near term, and not all immediately this year, because it will depend on people hitting their cashable leave automatic cash out balances, but it can be this year. And that happens in a lot of the unions. I think we actually prefer to have a cap on cashable leave. First, so that it's more predictable when people leave. And second, because if I have to cash it out in the near term, I'm paying you at today's wage rates instead of 30 years from now's wage rates. Okay. Mostly, though, that has been okay. So when certain other departments are having to deal with this unexpected amount of forced cashable leave, we have just tasked them all with absorbing it. And the good news is, generally across the board, people have actually been able to manage that, and we have just dealt with the cashable leave additional cash out. But the question that came to us was, we put it in such a light red that no one can even read it. Is there a particular challenge with fire? And the answer is yes. So why does fire have a particular challenge? And here I'm going to dive into the weeds on the fire department budget for a moment and say, fire, unlike a lot of the other departments, generally has a hard time absorbing unanticipated expenses. When the municipal attorney has unanticipated expenses and the front desk supervisor is going to be out on leave, and the choice is, do you hire someone from a temp agency or just put a sign on the door that says, sorry, due to staff outages, the office is closed. Say we put a sign on the door that says, sorry, the office is just closed today. That happens much less frequently with fire. So let's dive into it. And now, Christopher Constant is moving up the ranks. He's become fire chief. And I've given him, I'm going to use 2018 numbers because this is the last time I became municipal attorney manager about then. So that's when I was really diving into all of the understanding of how the budgets work. So I had these numbers already, so now you're getting old data, but this is what it was. So 2018, Chief Constant, I'm giving you a budget of $97 million, and I'm going to tell you, I got a problem, and I need you to find me 2%. I need you to save 2%. I'm like, come on, you got $97 million. You got to be able to find me $2 million, right? So the first way you look at that is you go, it breaks down to be $75 million in salary and benefits. And then you got this big, huge non-labor budget. You got $20 million in non-labor. Surely you can find me $2 million in non-labor. Problem number one is that 4.6 of 20 million is just debt service. So you've got to pay those bills. You don't really actually have any control over that. That's not a huge deal, right? You've got $15 more million. Go find me that money. When you open up the AFD non-labor budget, you find that the three biggest components are, first, this legacy payment to the police and fire retirement medical system. I'm going to get that name a little bit wrong, but before the mid-90s, firefighters and police officers were both in a retirement system and they had a medical benefit. The current firefighters the fire department still has to pay into that account. So every year the chief gets an invoice that says, send me $5 million for that legacy payment. There's no negotiation there. That just is what it is. Okay, so that just came off the top. $2 million is a straight pass-through to Girdwood and Chudiak, to their fire departments, and that's on a contract, so there's no playing with that. And then the last is this one that the Assembly has exercised an interest in. $5 million of their non-labor budget is a payment to AWU for maintaining all the fire hydrants. But the punchline then is I go, all right, find me that $2 million out of your $15 million of non-labor budget, and you go, well, actually the controllable portion, the stuff that I can actually choose to buy or not buy, is a lot closer to $5 to $6 million. And some of that is wired on contracts too, and realistically, a lot of it is uniforms and turnout gear and things, oil and lube, things to keep the machines working. I can't just stop buying all that. But if I say eat $2 million in that part of the budget, half of your non-labor budget is actually gone. So that's a problem. So then you go, all right, well, there is one other component to the fire department budget. I've got $75 million in salaries and benefits. Can I find some savings there? The answer is yes, but in a less intuitive way than you might imagine. And so looking at 2017, because this is the last report to the community that we have online, here are all our fire stations. Here's all our stuff: engines, medics, trucks, tenders, special stuff. You might think one way I'm going to solve some money is I'm just going to pick something completely at random, and I pick the last station on the list just because it's simple. I go, I've got one engine in station 15, and I got 3 people there. You might go, nobody come to work. Have you saved any money? Not really, unless you fire them, because they're actually on salary. So if they don't come to work, you're still paying for them. But you can tell them not, you can sort of play a game where you can save a little bit of money. How does that work? So in order to keep all of this stuff in service, under the contract, we need 98 bodies at every shift every day. 3 shifts, we need 98 bodies. We have about 109 firefighters to throw at that need for 98. So at any given time, we could have more people on shift, but the reality is that 11-person delta is largely or almost entirely consumed by people who are on vacation, which they're allowed to be on vacation sometimes, and the contract gives them that right, who are calling in sick, or who got injured and are on light duty or on some kind of workers' compensation. And then you have a choice. Every time you get 12 firefighters who say, I cannot work today, either you have to take something totally out of service, or you have to call one of the 2 other shifts who are not working and say, come in and I'm going to pay you overtime. And that is why the fire department's overtime budget is always high. So you can then turn the dial on the fire department's overtime budget by taking stuff out of service. So going back to our earlier example, how does that work? Now you say, I don't want the engine at station 15 to be in service today, but I do want all 3 of the people who usually report to station 15 to show up for work, and I'm going to redeploy them elsewhere in the system so that instead of calling shift B or shift C, okay, can come bail out shift A, I just take those 3 folks and move them around. And that means the big remaining cost reducing dial the fire department has to turn is choosing between whether you reduce overtime expenditures by changing service. That's sort of the only lever they have to pull. So the question was, is SAP causing a problem for the fire department? And the answer is partially. So because SAP because of the way we have negotiated these settlements, we have pushed more non-cash relief to the firefighters. There's a larger annual cash out than was originally budgeted. It wasn't an easy way for the fire department to absorb that. But in the meantime, there's a nearly equal size effect where we have had an unusual amount of people as compared to last year who are sick on FMLA or who are on light duty, so our overtime is already high. The punchline is, absent no additional changes by the end of the year, we think the fire department, and it's still got to sort itself out, is probably running about a 4% error, which shows up in the overall municipal budget as about slightly less than a 1% error, and it's probably due more to SAP than to sick and light duty, but it is roughly split between the two. I think maybe you could assign something more like 2.5 to the SAP side and 1.5 to the sick and light duty side. But that also assumes that nothing changes, and I will tell you that we had very serious conversations over the summer when we saw this coming about whether we take stuff out of service to reduce the overtime. And our conclusion in the middle of the crazy hot summer and drought we had in the MLK fire was no, we couldn't do it. Now that it is cold and rainy and about to snow, we are again having those conversations, but there's not a lot of overtime left to squeeze out of the system because we're so much further down the road. And none of that is ever popular. I mean, no, if we ever issue an edict that says, pick the station, you're not coming in for the next 3 months so we can get closer to meeting budget, I'm sure you guys will hear it. So I wanted to bring you guys into that story, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Cossins.
So what you just said was different than what you presented, though. Is if we close the stations, we're not telling them not to come in. We're telling them to come in so that they go somewhere where they're not normally housed, so that we can reduce the cost.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. I think when it shows up on Facebook or Nextdoor, it will more likely be reported as they have closed the station that is near me because nobody is there, or they took the engine that is near me out of service. No one is there.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
With the contractual provisions that you went through for the 9 different unions, is there a liability cutoff in terms of look back? It's ongoing, and so are we caught up to a certain point, or are we just kind of compounding what we already kind of had accrued as liability?
So, several responses to that. First, no, none of those provisions ever say, if after a year you still haven't fixed it, never mind, the penalty finally stops. So all of them compound forever. But, as I say, we have been working through with all of the unions trying to resolve it on a non-cashable leave basis. We are not through with everybody, but we are through with a lot. And there we did put a marker down, where we said, this cleans it all out, all the sort of known defects are now resolved. I think we sort of stopped bleeding on that front. The last part of that puzzle is, all of those provisions, as Assemblymember Dyson said, are not well calibrated to the actual injury. If I overpay you, it is not exactly clear to me why I may also owe you $200,000. It takes me a long time to fix that overpayment. And to their credit, I think the unions also agree with us. So the Assembly has seen, as we have been picking up the bargaining agreements and renegotiating them and bringing them to you now, these penalty provisions are all changing, and they're all becoming a lot more reasonable, I think. Thank you.
I have a comment on Mr. Dyson. I will say the overpayment, I was overpaid by the Department of Defense once, and actually was a huge headache for me, because unlike us, they clawed it all back, and then they screwed up my taxes, right? Because I'd already paid taxes on that money. So I do see why that frustrates people. So just back in the envelope, 4% of the AFD, I mean, we're coming towards the end of the year, right? So there probably isn't too much you can do. I mean, there's some, but just do it back of the envelope. That sounds about between $3 and $4 million. Is that right?
I think that's right.
So do we have any sense of how what we're going to do? Where are we going to find that money?
So that'll all be part of our budget proposal to you. I think we are anticipating ending the year on the fire side in the hole. There'll be some offsetting gains from hotbed taxes and from the rest of the departments that did not come in too hot.
but that'll be part of our story. We're not going to hide that. That will show up as fire department went over.
The fire department went over not necessarily because Chief Hetrick's mismanagement.
Chief Constance.
Yes, but because basically it's basically a result of the SAP fiasco. That's the trickle down you showed us seems like that's a huge chunk of it.
It is a big chunk of it, and it even can affect some of the additional leave that we saw for a whole variety of reasons that we can get into. But I think you're right. It reflects both our trading this $1 billion paper liability for a much more manageable, non-cashable leave liability, and then making the policy decision that we were not going to take tenders out of service in the middle of this summer.
Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. I came to this job this time really wanting to push on the contracts that the contracts themselves do not severely limit management prerogatives. Working conditions, benefits, salary and stuff, I'm cool with that. But management prerogatives, that keeps you from being able to manage so our taxpayers are getting about as efficient a use of the people. So, and I suspect in general my colleagues support that. But I'd really encourage you to, every time you get in a hard spot like this, there are lessons to learn and to look for those kind of things. And also, I suspect our employees are sympathetic to the very issue and are not going to take advantage of us and so on. But if something unexpected like this, like penalty for overpayments, comes up in the future, there ought to be a clear understanding that, hey, that's negotiable, and we want to work that out for you. And if we don't, we're going to go to arbitration or something, a mechanism for resolution.
Yes, so through the chair, everything is negotiable. The way these penalties are claimed is they file a step 1 grievance with the chief reviews it, likely denies it, it goes to HR. If we can't come to a resolution, then it goes to arbitration. So far, we have been successful in coming to some negotiated resolution at that step 2 place. We have not gone to arbitration, in part because I'm not sure what an arbitrator would do when faced with all of this. But I think you're right that it has given us new motivation to take a hard look at what fetters the contract does have that makes it harder to manage some of these budgets. And we do have a short list of things that I think would be material improvements that hopefully everybody can come to some resolution on as we're taking some of these up.
Yeah, and for me, if I may, the grand example is having the police on 410s. That makes it hard for us to put people in the school because you got some set of that are working on a different schedule. I want you to have that prerogative. Thank you.
Thank you. We started a little late, so we'll go a little, maybe 5 minutes over. We have Mr. Costa, Mr. Peters, and then Ms. LaFrance.
So separate from the conversation about these contract negotiations and big picture analysis of budgets, what's the status of pay correction liability right now? What are the numbers coming in at? Do you have that for us? Are we getting closer still? Or, because I continue to hear some concerns from our workers that they're not being paid properly.
The status of pay correction. So, yes, I think tell me this is responsive, but we, on September 24th, I believe we are putting into production the last of the errors that has been identified to me that is resulting in a regular and predictable underpayment. There's one part of the plumbers union that still has this crazy thing about, I think, overnights. But I believe we're at the place then where the underpayments are, there's certainly going to be some weird onesie-twosies. If it's a holiday and you are working out of trade and you are being enacting, then something broke. But for the most part, the underpayments should be cleaned up and fixed. I think you can look forward in our presentation to a proposal for next year to say, now that the system is largely correct paying people forward, we do need to now complete the long preview task of picking up everybody since September 2017 and doing a double check that said, okay,
We fixed the system, we let it retro to the point where we think that this machine clearing up as many errors as it knows how to clean up. It's correctly configured for the prospective use, but now let's pick up everybody who has worked for us in September 2017 and make sure they got paid correctly. Hopefully, that would be a process of confirming that yes, that they were always paid correctly or they were mispaid, and then we fixed it. But we feel an obligation to the employees to actually do that. And that will mean an auditing project of some scope. We have on staff at any given time something like 2,500 employees, but over the course of 2 years, come people go, it's probably 4,000 individuals that we have paid since September 2017, and I think we need to look at all of them.
Mr. Peterson, Ms. LaFrance, and then Ms. Kennedy, and then I think we need to end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. So, have we clawed back overpayments from employees, or are we still working on that?
The best way to answer that is we are still working on it. I am not aware. Let me say right now, we're still working on it. I'm not aware of a large volume of overpayments that have ever been clawed back. And I will say, in our calculus, as we think through this, the chair is correct. The clawing back overpayments can itself be a huge administrative hassle on our end and a total cluster on the employee side as well.
But overall, because before we actually were using SAP, there were typically some errors in payments to employees regularly every month.
Right.
So are we back close to where we were before we were using SAP?
Yes, and we have been at least monitored by the number of paper pay corrections that people are submitting to us. So before, this is the charts that I used to show, and that I will show at least one more time before the end of the year when Chris Erickson, the individual who prepares them, retires. Before we turned, in the PeopleSoft era, we used to get 50 paper pay corrections a month. We turned on SAP, and in the first month we got 1,098 or 1,200 or 1,028, something like that. The next month we got 900. The next month I think it was 800. But then it calmed down, and it held steady for a very long time at about 100. Still not as good as it should be. Probably still underreported because there are certainly some number of people just frustrated that I'm not sending any more paper pay corrections in payroll. But our lived experience seems to be that it really has gotten materially better. We think we are pretty close to sort of the new stabilized norm, but there's always going to be some care and feeding, and we would more than anybody, believe me, we would love to close the chapter on this and start talking about how to solve homelessness and make our world a better place rather than how to fix errors in pay for 2017.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. Do we have any idea how many, if any, employees have been pushed into a higher tax bracket or income bracket because of overpayments? And then defects-wise, how many defects do you know have been fixed this year? How many more do you have to go?
I do not personally know how many people who may have been pushed into a higher tax bracket, although I'm sure someone in HR can probably generate that. But again, I think this gets miscommunicated a lot. The being pushed into a higher tax bracket, because we have progressive rates, doesn't have an out-toward effect, right? So if you are paid, you are supposed to be paid this much, and your effective tax rate is supposed to be 18%, and I give you a few more dollars, and those are taxed in the next tax bracket at 20%, you're still paying 18% on the original. So if I never recoup the overpayment, it is absolutely no injury. So I don't know that answer as I sit here now. I did not get the current running list of the number of defects that we have created. I know that I've been reporting what we were calling the fast track or high critical defects. And like I say, I was advised that there was one left for the plumbers that was resulting in a systemic overpayment. That was not one of these rare bird scenarios where all sorts of things had to happen in order for it to be misconfigured. And that was supposed to be in on September 24th.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. France. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In talking about the payroll correction request forms, do they still need to fill those out, or are you doing checking over these in such a way that they don't have to do that? Because there was the frustration of, I've done this enough times and I'm not getting anywhere.
So the official answer is yes. It is definitely helpful for us to get a sense of that first because it gives us a sense of how the system is actually functioning, and second because it alerts us to things we might not otherwise discover. The reality is it's most helpful if you had a rare bird event or something that wasn't related to the system misconfiguration. So the system didn't pay me correctly because I got my new professional engineering certification and that should have changed my rates and nobody put that in, or because I took leave and I forgot to put it in and now I need to change. So we still want everyone to do it. I don't think there are issues that are hidden from us at this point. I think if you were a plumber who was mispaid because of this overnight issue from September to July and you stopped sending us paper pay corrections in August, we're not going to miss that. We will find that.
Thank you. What's your concept?
Just note that the clock in this room is running 4 minutes fast, and we just went over.
Oh, good. Well, then we have time for audience participation. Would anyone like to speak? Yes.
My name is Eugene Cohen, representing myself, Public Trust, an appropriate decision made by the governing body will like the public interest. Thank you for remembering constant for correcting and noting the clock being an error to the event hearing. What I would like to, two things. I do appreciate the rather thorough presentations both on the Browse and Bill Foster today in explaining the situations. And but it also gives more grounds to why the meetings cannot be here. They need to be in LUSAC. The public could hear this because I keep on being reminded when I attend your meetings here that the public is not connected as well as being in LUSAC with the video audio. And then the presentations like that was given by Bill Foster, there's no paperwork, it's a visual, and those who listen to the tape, audio tape for this meeting won't be able to have that paperwork, that visual that we are all seeing here. And then the last thing I'll say is this, it's only the beginning that we're experiencing as far as the trauma that happened the last 6 months, dealing with the state budget crisis and what you were dealing with. You approved a budget, I remind you, in December for this year, and you went back, the administration came back at the last minute, and then you were going to do a lot of amendments or cuts. And by the way, when I say you, some of you were not assembly members at the time, respectively. Okay, that was April's election, but the budget was approved in December for January. And the scenario is, I remember that over the weekend and the next Tuesday, the result was the mayor came out and said, hey, we found this money, and part of that was in reference to what was said today, the garnishment issue. The monies they expect with supposedly we're going to have a big dividend, a large bigger than one that is expected. And that premise was based on, okay, we can deal with we'll have the money. And therefore those amendments that were initially put forth were substantially cut, if not all. And the end result is it was a dream world of expectations that were not real. So now we're hearing, again, and I remind you this a couple of months ago too, but now we're dealing with, and we do not know. We really do not know. And I would strongly, in closing, from now on, really take a conscientious effort and deal with the real world that we are in right now. And it's real. And in fact, we do not know the future, and we need to be very conservative and real, and the public needs to know that you are really conscientious with how the money is being spent wisely. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to participate? All right, seeing no one, this committee is adjourned.